Continuing on with George Bayer Time Factors in the Stock Market book, and going back to the diagram here where we have George describing Scorpio being the eagle and the sun moving through the domain of the sun into the wilderness, which was the sign of Leo. Now Leo is right here, so the wilderness goes between Leo and Virgo right here in this section of the domain of the sun. So what he's doing here, he's giving us these points for the domain of the sun, which is 13, 36, 12 of Taurus, which is right here. Here's the symbol for Taurus. 13 degrees 28 minutes in is the start of the domain of the sun. And that ends here in Virgo. And that ends at 16 degrees 21:48 in the sign of Virgo. And then Jupiter and Saturn dominate the other two sections. So one of George's main findings was the concept of critical degrees, and he talks about those further in the end of this or in another section. I think it's part 5 of this book. He talks about critical degrees in the signs, but what he's doing here, he's giving you an indication of what some of these critical degrees are. So he's taking these 2 points and moving 122.5 degrees away and giving up these 2 points in Capricorn. Now he doesn't discuss these 2 points in Capricorn until a little bit later. And these 2 points are 1915 and 1104 of Capricorn. So that gives 2 more critical degrees. Now, backing up to the diagram again, the center of this 122.5 degree domain of the sun is at 15 degrees of Cancer. Now, he's also talked about Leo. Now, I want to mention here that the 15 degrees of Leo point, which Bayer had talked about in his Bible interpretations, but he just kind of glosses over it here. That's another very important point. And I covered that in my 9th hour videos. So I recommend you search the channel. There's 2 or 3 videos I did describing the 9th hour, which is the 15 degrees of Leo point. Now, at 15 degrees of Cancer, we go the other side of that is 15 of Capricorn, which is right in the middle of those 2 points. But if you go 122.5 from either the beginning or the end of the domain of the sun, that's how you get those 2 points in Capricorn. Now, you can extrapolate that idea with what I just said about 15 degrees of Leo. And you can take that 15 degrees of Leo, which is another critical degree, and you can add and subtract 122.5 degrees from that to find the other 2 points relating to 15 degrees of Leo. And that's going to give us some additional points to use. So you can look, you got to experiment, look for planets crossing these degrees and see what the effect was in the market. So in the rest of the video, I'm going to do some examples, but I'm going to use the primary degrees based on the Taurus and Virgo and the Capricorn degrees, and I'm going to use the Leo point and the 2 additional points away from there. And then that's going to be shown in these examples. Now, you can also do the same thing for the center of this domain for 15 degrees of Cancer. And that's going to give you two additional points at 227 degrees and 343 degrees. So I'm going to not include those in any of the examples. I'm going to let you look into those yourself, but I'm going to look at the primary degrees that George mentioned here, along with the Leo degrees in the examples that are going to follow. Planets over to see what kind of reaction I'm going to get in the market. So I'm going to go to the Bitcoin chart and try to apply some of these using the planets. So using these 7 degree points in each planetary cycle, so every revolution of a planet or the sun in the zodiac, we're going to get 7 hit points. So I'm going through, right now I've got arrows on the chart. I'm showing the points of the sun transiting these degrees. So the very first point is 1 day off of that high here back in October of 24. That's the sun at 13 degrees. The next point is 1 day off this low. That's the 43 degrees, or the 13 Taurus point. The next date is February 3rd. It's the big spike low right here. After that, we had the 166.5 point on March 6th at this pivot high. The 257 degree point is 1 day off this low on June 7th. The next point is the 281 degree point, and that's that low right there on July 2nd. And then the last point is the 289 point, or 19 Capricorn, and that is not much there. We had one very minor bar that made a down close, and then it zoomed back up to make that high. So of those, 6 out of those 7 points were pretty good hit points. Let's take a look at another. All right, on the chart I have plotted arrows for these degree points in the zodiac, and here I'm using geocentric Mercury. So the first point here is on the 24th of May, 1 day off of this low, and I think I started that at the 43 degree point, and I went through and did a full cycle through Mercury to the 43 degree point at the last arrow. So the second point, I'm not going to call out all the degrees, I'm just going to show the result of these projections. The next point was a minor low off a little reaction right in front of a nice move up. The next point was also a reaction low, triggering a nice move up. Now you see I have 3 projections inside of the red rectangle here. What this is, this was that 257 degree point. What happened, Mercury transited through, went retrograde, transited it again the second time, and then Mercury turned direct and transited that point a third time. So I marked those in the red rectangle to show that they were all related and going over that same degree. The first one is just a very minor high. It only triggered a 1 day down move. The second one was 1 day off of this big spike low wick here. And the last one was 1 day in front of the low right here in front of a good upswing. Then I had the 281 and 289 points back to back. The 281 didn't really do much. It was a little bit early, but the market flipped on the 289. It made that high as it challenged and made a false break through the level of the prior high, and then turned back down right as Mercury was at that 289 degree point. And then the last 2 projections, one was just a reaction low in front of the resumption of the uptrend, and the last one was the same. We had a little bit of a choppy correction. We had a down bar right here, the market started up, and then another down bar. And on that up bar, we had our timer kicking that up long. We got a 1-day reversal with another low next to that, and then it continued on up. Anyhow, that is geocentric Mercury, one full cycle. Here are the Venus geo points on the chart. Had to go back to July of 24 to start the cycle. The first one comes in at this minor high here. Next one is a low right there. We're 1 day off the top here. Another top here in November. That one went right back to a low. This was the 281 and 289. That was a swing between those points. And then we had a long period of retrograde activity between the 289 and the 13 point. So there's really nothing happening in there. Then we don't get any hits until bars. And this one here was this minor low in front of this swing right there. So there's the hot degrees, or the critical degrees, from George Bayer from the Time Factors book. And I've shown the Sun and then Mercury and Venus in the geo mode there. So you might want to also take a look at that in Helio. You might want to also look at Mars and even the larger planets. And the other thing that I didn't show or really talk about with this is you might want to look at George's diagram. And he says the domain of the Sun is this area. The other two are controlled by Jupiter and Saturn. You may want to take a look at how those planets, the times those planets are transiting through these periods, and to see if they have a particular impact on any particular market. So I just used Bitcoin for the hell of it because Bitcoin's so popular now. Everyone wants that, but I also did that to show that the principles that George Bayer talked about in the 1930s, where he predominantly just used the wheat market and some stocks, will work just as well today on brand new markets that weren't even around at that time. Just to reiterate the key degree points, we have the Taurus point, the Virgo point, and the 2 Capricorn points. There are 4 points right there. We can add 6 more. We can take the 15 degree of Leo point, add and subtract 122.5 degrees. That's going to put you to 13 and 257, or 12.5 and 257.5. I've just rounded off. And then you can get the Cancer points. You can go to the midpoint of Cancer, which is the middle of the domain of the Sun, at 15 Cancer. You can add 122.5 there to get 227, and you could subtract 122.5 from 105, and that takes you to the 343 degree point. So those are 10 critical degree points that you can use, and they should be effective on any market. So far, all the planets that I've looked at have had an impact, but generally there will be 2 planets that will be most dominant in any market.